Ever wondered how trailblazing risk leaders navigate uncertainty with finesse and confidence? Uncover the surprising connections between their personal journey and professional prowess, and get ready to learn and elevate your risk management game with the RiskMasters podcast. Join host Julien Haye in collaboration with Risk.net as they delve into hidden gems of risk leadership through engaging conversations and thought-provoking insights from board directors to chief risk officers and business leaders.
Today's guest is Samantha Regan, Managing Director and Risk Transformation Lead at Accenture. With more than 20 years at the forefront of regulatory change and business transformation, Samantha brings unmatched experience in helping financial institutions modernize their risk and compliance functions. From Barclays to Accenture, her work has spanned global risk strategy, AI integration, regulatory reform, and cultural change across the industry. In this episode, we explore how a risk function is evolving and what it means to lead transformation at scale. We dive into the role of Gen AI, the balancing act between regulatory expectations and business agility, and why risk culture is a secret ingredient to making transformation stick. If you enjoyed this conversation, please don't forget to follow, review, and share RiskMasters on your podcast platform of choice. For more insights and resources, please visit avitium.com. I'm Julien Haye, and this is RiskMasters. Welcome to this new episode of RiskMasters. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Samantha Regan. Samantha has a fantastic experience in risk and consultancy, and we are going to explore that in detail. Samantha, welcome today.
Thank you, Julien. It's great to be here and appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today.
You spent about, I think, actually 2 decades at Accenture this year, if I'm not mistaken. It's your anniversary this year. Leading risk and compliance transformation. What did draw you into that field?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Julien. I think I've always been sort of involved throughout my career in helping either our clients, or prior to joining Accenture, when I was working in industry, always involved in large scale transformational programs. And I think what I really like about them is that first and foremost, it's a really good opportunity to, work on some really complex problems with our clients, things that are really important to them and their strategy and how they need to address, perhaps some of the things that they're working on. And so being able to problem solve and engage with them and help sort of think through, how to achieve an outcome and get value out of what they're doing is something that has always, sort of been very interesting to me, and something that I feel has a real purpose when we're working with our clients and helping them achieve those things.
And when I look into your career path at Accenture, you held several leadership roles, right, in the risk and regulatory practice. When you look back into your career, what was the most defining transformation project you worked on so far?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that it's funny, when you start on some projects, you never really know which ones are going to be the most, the most interesting or the most important. And I think around the time that I made managing director in Accenture, I was working with one of our clients on a transformation program. When we first started that, it was not something that I expected would turn into what it did, and it was a really great opportunity to work with some very bright clients who had a great vision about what they wanted to achieve, and to be a part of that was something that I really enjoyed, sort of helping them on that sort of journey. And for me, that was really the time as well that I felt I grew up as a leader, and had to go from running it started as a quite small project for us into something that turned into quite a large project for us very quickly. And that meant that I really had to get to grips very quickly with how to manage large teams, how to coordinate and scale, how to make sure that we were getting the client what they needed and in the way that they needed it and by the deadline that they needed it, and how to motivate everyone around sort of wanting to help that client achieve that goal. So I would say for me, that was definitely one of the kind of career defining moments for me, and obviously sort of really set me up for success then as I sort of moved into other roles at Accenture after that.
And I absolutely want to know a little bit more about of the challenges and what it meant, but we'll come back to that. I think it's It's super interesting, especially transformation, which is all about people. And from your time from Barclays, actually, so in industry to becoming managing director at Accenture, what was a pivotal moment that really shaped your approach to leadership and risk? And I think you partially answered that question, but do you have anything else to add?
I've always felt that you have to lead with purpose. I've always felt that you have to lead with integrity. And I've always felt that you have to bring people on the journey with you. And I think that what I saw when I was working in industry was that there was a much bigger opportunity out there within consulting to do that at scale. And also to learn from moving from client to client. I think that really shaped me as a leader. I think one of the other things that I had the opportunity to do throughout my career is travel a lot. And so that exposes you to lots of different cultures, a lot of change personally. And from that, you have to rapidly adapt. And so therefore, I think that sort of gave me, a lot of the sort of flexibility needed so that when you're in these transformation programs, you're able to work and pivot with the client as, things evolve and things change. And it also gives you exposure to working with lots of different people. And I think, to your point around people being one of the most sort of critical parts of transformation, that, bringing everybody along on the journey is really important.
And you just said something, perhaps I'd like to explore a little bit more. You said that you saw more opportunity actually in consulting to do lead transformation at scale compared to the industry. Why was that?
I think it was more the opportunity to work across different clients and work across sort of different, geographies, different industries, and also, just sort of get that exposure to different problem statements as well. And, I've spent most of my career working in financial services, and, every client that you work with is different. Everything that they need to solve for is different. But, I think that also I felt like I've always been someone who really enjoys change, and I enjoy, kind of moving from, problem statement to problem statement. And I think that consulting just gives you more flexibility around that.
Yeah, I absolutely can see that and relate to it as well. And if I actually build on what you were saying and look at it from a different lens, what do you think people still misunderstand about what risk transformation is and what it really means in practice?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's actually one that, we discuss actually a lot. As you sort of, transformation is a really big word, and it can mean lots of different things to different people. And transformations, to some people could mean, small incremental changes that get you to a goal. For others, it's a more fundamental reshift of the business that they're running and, how they want to reinvent that for the future. And I think for others, it's they have some challenges and they really need to adapt very quickly. And I think that sort of working with a client to really pinpoint what it is they're actually trying to achieve, and helping them make sure that they've got plans and, sort of activities underway they're actually going to help them get there, is a big part of what I think we do and we need to do well with our clients all the time, so that, we can help them, kind of get to that outcome. But I also think that, as you're going through this and you're looking at what transformation means, I think the way that I think about it is it can mean, complete reinvention, but it can also mean complete sort of, I take what I've got today and I'm just trying to optimize it and make it better. And I think the most important thing is to understand where that client is, meet them where they are on that journey, and make sure that you're tailoring your approach to that.
And I think you're building on something that is important as well, to help the people you work with actually clarify what the actual problem they're trying to solve for, right? Because I do find a lot of the time in risk management, people say, I have that problem. And then when you start drilling down a little bit, actually their real problem is something else. Do you see that as well in your work?
Yeah, no, absolutely, all the time. It's, and again, that's sort of something that actually that is a big part of where I think consulting can really help bring that clarity to listening to all the different sort of problem statements the clients are trying to express, all the different activities that they're trying to achieve. And sometimes I think helping to bring sort of that lens of simplification and streamlining what they're trying to do so that they actually have plans that are in place that are going to achieve that goal is a huge part of what I think we do and the value add that we can bring to those transformations.
And so in that context, you clearly advise your clients on aligning risk management with business strategy, business outcomes, right? What's the key to making that alignment real rather than just, high-level vision and aspiration?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I think, a lot of the time we spend with our clients really drilling down into, getting them to, first of all, articulate what they think that outcome actually looks like in practice. So if we think about like the day in the life of, someone who's then going to sort of be a part of that transformed world, what does it look and feel like? Do they come in? Is it the same activities that they're doing on a day-to-day basis? Is it that we're expecting them to do different things going forward? And if so, what do they imagine that looks like? What technology are they going to be using? How do they think about data? How do they think about the processes they need to perform? And then most importantly, how are they thinking about sort of the risk and control activities that then need to be put in place? And then I think it's also about how do you also change the culture and the mindset so that the people who are then a part of that, transformed, unit are sort of appreciating what it is that they're expected to do and the way in which they're expected to do it. And I think driving that cultural change is one of the hardest things to do. I think putting the pieces and the parts together, is a little bit easier, and you can clarify a lot faster sort of how to do that, depending on what it is that you're specifically trying to do in that circumstance. But actually then getting people to change their behavior and also start to think with more of a risk mindset is, I think a lot harder to do.
And if you were to have one or two advice, what would you give to people listening on that front?
I think it's always think with the end user in mind, what is it that's going to look like and feel like? And then if you start to appreciate that, how do you make that as easy as possible for them to consume the change that you're trying to achieve? How do you make sure that they're a part of the journey and that you're bringing them on the journey from the start? How do you make sure they feel like they've been given the skills and the capabilities to be successful? And how do you make sure that that is embedded in the plans and the activities that you're going to do on the project so that, you have that clearly defined as a part of the overall sort of goals and success of the project itself?
Coming from the industry, I worked a lot on risk transformation as well. And I can only echo what you say, especially on the cultural side, which I find a lot was lacking, if that makes sense, where people focus more on the capability front, but ignore in the toolkit, etc., which is important. You need to have it, but you can't operationalize it without having the right culture that supports it. And Credit Suisse and what happened there with Archegos is a case in point of that. And in the context of transformation, there's always a cost component to it. And we talk more and more about bringing agility as well and the ability to pivot. How do you help clients in that context balancing the cost aspect and be efficient with regulatory expectation that have a tendency to inflate the cost structure of a business?
For me, it's one of the things that I see all the time where a lot of the time you come into clients and they've got so many goals and they've kind of come up with these very elaborate plans and they're not always clear around what it is that you're trying to achieve and what success looks like. So I think for me, very early sort of focus on what did you say you would do and what do you think that looks like and how do you think that aligns to the expectations that, you have with your regulator or that you set with your regulator. And then how do you make sure that what you're doing is tied back to that goal so that you're not going further than perhaps you need to, or that you are also not falling short is a very fine line. And, we work with our clients a lot to kind of help them sort of define what that looks like. And sometimes that's about sharing sort of industry practice and how others do this. Sometimes that's about sort of helping, again, coming back to your previous question around how do you help them clarify what that goal looks like, making sure that as you're working with them that they're clearly articulating, what's expected here, and then that they're calibrating plans to that. And there'll always be time, to kind of go beyond that at some point in the future, but making sure that you're clearly focused on how to get to, what you said you would do and execute that well, I think is really important. And then I think as you think about how you can make that more efficient, I think we always like to bring ideas around how technology can perhaps accelerate what you're doing, particularly the use of, some of the newer technologies that are out there, like generative AI. I think there's a lot of great applications there. For example, if you're trying to, sort of rationalize controls, or if you're trying to map regulations to your control framework, then, I think there's ways to accelerate now that didn't exist sort of a number of years ago. But at the same time, you've got to balance that with making sure that they get to where they need to get to as quickly as possible. And sometimes I think, there's so much going on during that period, and everyone is under a lot of pressure because they need to make sure they're achieving what they said they would achieve in their plans, that I think you've also got to calibrate when's the right time to try and accelerate with technology, and when's the right time to, sort of just make sure that clear frameworks are in place and that they're building towards the right path and the right goals as they get started.
It's a balancing act, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And from your experience, what does it take to elevate a compliance function from what can be perceived as a control gatekeeper? Let's be honest, we talk a lot about ticking the box and pure compliance without looking into more the strategic aspect and being a strategic partner for the executive team, for the board.
Compliance has definitely been on a journey, going from, as you say, being sort of like a check the box function into having a real seat at the table. And I think this started to happen a number of years ago as we saw, regulations starting to come in that talked about compliance risk management, not just compliance management. And I think being able to kind of advise, whether it's a deal team or someone who's developing a new product, making sure they're there at the table at the start so that they can make sure that that advice and guidance is provided from the beginning, I think can help solve a lot of sort of longer term issues. If they sort of brought it at the end of the process as an afterthought, thought it's sort of not perhaps as helpful as having them there at the beginning and everyone trying to solve together for what they're, you're trying to achieve within the business. And I think also, looking at ways in which that you can find, to not necessarily minimize the need to comply with regulations, but start to embed, that capability by design into what you're doing so that it becomes just a part of the process as opposed to something that's like an overhead. And then I think building out those advisory teams that are there to guide the business in, what they're trying to achieve and provide the right guidance and the right sort of depth of subject matter expertise. And then also making sure that as a part of your risk reporting and your, discussions with, senior leadership and the board that, compliance is there from the beginning, and that, senior leadership and the board sort of have a good, strong appreciation for the compliance risks.
Yeah, it can't be an afterthought, right? I've seen that in the industry where the risk compliance function are being brought in at the end, and you're like, you can't do what you're going to do. You have to change everything. That doesn't go down well usually, and it's very unhelpful for all parties involved, isn't it?
That's right. That's right.
And you mentioned, and we can't have a discussion nowadays without talking about AI, so let's go there. You mentioned Gen AI and Gen AI in risk compliance function, never mind audit, is really typical nowadays. So what opportunities do you see, and what are the watch outs? So what should people pay attention to in your views?
Yeah, I mean, it's a balancing act, right? Generative AI brings a lot of opportunity. But you've got to make sure that you're doing that in a responsible way, and that you've got the right controls in place, and that you are making sure that people understand how to use the AI in a way that doesn't contravene sort of the risks that you might see with it. And I think that particularly in the risk and compliance space, generative AI brings in a tremendous opportunity to really take the heavy lift out of some of the activities that are not necessarily value add. And so therefore, giving people who are focused on risk and compliance the opportunity to focus more on managing the risks and less on the process of having to, say, for example, map regulations to control frameworks and things that are perhaps a little bit more administrative in process and less focused on sort of like the value add of actually really understanding how that compliance risk or that operational risk, for example, or the financial risk is manifesting in the business itself. And I think that as we see generative AI start to take, what is a lot of unstructured data that you see, particularly in the non-financial and the compliance risk space, and turn that into more structured data that you can then use, you can really start to think about how you could embed that into the design of, the workflows and the technology that you're developing so that you're starting to make sure that that's sort of embedded in, a standard repeatable process as opposed to, perhaps leaving it sort of in a place where you've got to have, humans more involved in the actual process itself. And that always opens up sort of operational risk, right? So I think that for me, that's where generative AI is going to add a lot of value, I think, is taking that sort of heavy lift off compliance and risk functions so they can really focus on the jobs that they need to do. There's always going to be a need for humans to be in the loop. It's not like the humans are being removed from the process, but I think it's more about how they focus their time and what they focus it on.
And I think coming from there, there's a very clear need also to reskill part of the risk function and compliance function, because people are probably a little bit too much focused on processes and procedures rather than actual risk management, which was clearly an observation even in the team I managed. So I was trying to steer them away from that. So, and in that context, how do you help your client embrace such innovation without losing control of their risk environment, right? Because it still triggers a lot of unknown, right? In, all of this new technology.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that there's a lot of leaders growing up very excited now around the concept of how AI can help them. And I think that, anyone who uses AI products in their day-to-day work, they can start to see some of the benefits that that brings for them. So particularly if they're using it in some of their more administrative tasks. I think though it is about the skills and it is about making sure that again, coming back to change management, that you are taking people on that journey and that they start to understand, how they're going to interact with a digital workforce as much as they interact with, the human workforce, and how those pieces come together. And that, I don't think, can be underestimated as sort of something you need to really focus on when you start to think about deploying sort of AI and generative AI at scale, is that human element again. And the more you deploy it, the more you need to focus on that. And so I think that there's sort of three areas that we sort of recommend to our clients when they're looking at transforming and using technology as a part of that. First and foremost, how do you take this opportunity to really simplify like the risk framework and make sure that there's clarity around roles and responsibilities, sort of you've taken some of the complexity perhaps out of policy and you're deploying that in a more efficient and effective way. I think you then definitely need to be thinking about sort of modern technologies and how you're going to use data, how you're going to leverage generative AI. But then you also need to think about the people aspect of this and what are the right skills and capabilities that you have in the organization. And sort of you're going to probably have to look at different ways of thinking about sort of the skills and the people that you need. You're going to need people who are going to be really, kind of comfortable with the technology. They know how to write prompts. They know how to get the most out of that technology going forward. You're going to need people who are real sort of risk thought leaders who really understand and bring that depth of subject matter expertise that's required. And then you're going to need people who can, we would term them, so become risk athletes and be able to, quickly adapt to evolving situations, emerging risks, changes in the environment, and are able then to pivot and address those problems, as needed.
It's about resilience, isn't it? And in an unpredictable world. In fact, I had on his show Roger Spitz. I don't know if you know him, but he wrote about disruption with impact, and he's all about uncertainty and predictability and foresight, and that ability to pivot you mentioned, and creating that resilience almost by design and construction and slack that comes with it is paramount. And actually, I'd like to build on what you mentioned, because you talk about reskilling your people and repositioning that. When you look into the toolkit itself and the risk and compliance framework, do you think they're still fit for purpose in that context?
I would say that there's perhaps work to do, shall we say. I think that everyone's used to doing their compliance training, right? You get in and you kind of click the box and you click through that as quickly as possible so that you can get on with what you need to do on a day-to-day basis. And I think moving from training that is, kind of designed perhaps for a previous era to training that's maybe more designed and aligned to the individual and their personal journey is important, so that they're getting the right skills and capabilities that they need for what they do. I think investing in leadership and building leadership skills, and also building that risk awareness and the risk culture, not into just risk professionals, but everybody should be thinking and acting like a risk manager. And, doing that requires, I think, different skills and different training opportunities, and also leadership programs, things that sort of really invest in people and help them on that journey of around the career goals that they have in the risk and compliance function.
Yeah, I came across a fantastic platform yesterday, actually, that does embed gamification in the LMS platform, which will make those risk and compliance training so less boring than what they currently are, frankly. And I've designed some of them for my sins, so I'm partially to blame for those type of things. And so here I will actually ask you to turn the table and say you were back in the industry, you're a chief risk officer. And you were saying you actually invite your clients to think about what good looks like and how they project themselves, right? So what does a digitally enabled, future-ready risk function actually look like for you if you were in the shoes of your clients?
It's a really good question. And it's funny, when we were thinking about, how we helped our clients with risk transformation here at Accenture, one of the things we sat back and said is, well, if we don't have an idea of what the future looks like, it's really hard to go and help our clients, kind of imagine what that might look like. I think we're heading out of an era where you're checking the box and you're trying to be just like your peers. I think that whilst that's important, I think we're in an era that if you are, lucky to be in a place where you can demonstrate that you're effective to a regulator, you have a real opportunity now to really differentiate and think about what type of capability that you would like to have, in the organization that adds value, drives growth, reduces client and customer friction, and really sort of enables the business to achieve its goals. And to me, that is, data driven. It's, you have smart tools and technologies that allow you to quickly get to the point of what you're trying to achieve, whether that's searching for a regulation and sort of what part of the text exactly you need to think about using AI, whether that's being able to leverage technologies to take away the heavy lift of things that are not value add activities, and really being able to focus on how do I help the business drive forward what they're doing, And how do I do that in a way that sort of not just reduces cost, but adds real value? And to me, when I look at like the operating model that we all know and love today, which like all the boxes on a page and has a very similar look and feel to the way the world looks today, I think what AI is going to give us the ability to do is really reinvent the way we look at risk and compliance processes and provide opportunities to not just rewire the business so that it's, a lot of like risk and compliance process work is being done, or through technology, through data, and really live in a world where it's all there at sort of like the push of a button. And what you really need to do is focus on what have I got to be looking at today, what's emerging in the risk and compliance space I need to be concerned about, and then how I'm communicating and managing my interactions with stakeholders, whether they're internally or externally, to show that we have this under control, and all of that being driven by good data and the right technologies to enable you to get the insights that you need, and then to have the skills and competence of the organization around you to help you manage this in the most effective way.
Well, I can already see three areas in credit risk, market risk, also financial crime, which are heavily data-driven, where what you outline is actually already happening in some pockets. So it's clearly there, but there's far more scope, I think, in my view, to develop what you outlined. And you talked about emerging risks, right? Again, especially nowadays with everything that's going on throughout the world, what do you think people are, what do you think might be under the radar? Actually, people are not really paying attention to this. Should really lift the lead and pay attention to that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, I think that, clearly, we're living in a world where there's a lot of emerging conflict between countries at the moment. That's going to have impact on, supply chains. It's going to have impact on people's lives. And I think that we're living in a world where, there's a lot of what we would say is geopolitical risk as well. And, it's very hard to not, speak about things like tariffs and sort of the impact that's having on sort of the business. It's hard to imagine where all of these changes will go. But what I do think is clear is that the pace of change and the pace of, what's happening in the world is not going to slow down. And being adaptable and being flexible and building those muscles into the organization, I think are going to be really important sort of tools for success going forward.
And just building on that, do you think organizations are ready for what you outlined based on what you're saying?
I think they're trying to be, and I think they're aware that they need to be. I think that what's really important though is that you build the capabilities that give you that agility, and I think that a lot of clients want to go on that journey. I think that the hardest thing is sort of where do you start and how do you get started and where do you focus. And to your point earlier, I think we see that in areas like sort of anti-money laundering right now, or sort of some of the financial risks. But the hardest thing is the unknown of the non-financial risks and what that will bring next. And I think staying on top of that and pacing with that is really important.
I think people don't pay attention enough to their supply chain personally, and they don't understand it enough.
Yeah, no, that's probably true.
And you've already touched on some of that, but what role does culture play in really making risk framework effective, right? And especially during large-scale transformation?
I think it plays a really important part, because if you're not prepared to change and you're not prepared to embrace that, risk is a part of your everyday role going forward, then, it's going to be really hard to be a part of that new culture going forward. And so I think that, well, first of all, I think it's about acknowledging that risk is a part of your everyday role, and it's something that everybody should be thinking about. And I think it's also about setting that tone from the top, from leadership, that this is what we expect from our people, and this is, how we would like you to be, sort of behaving in the future. And if those expectations are not there, then it's really hard to change that from the bottom up.
Well, and sometimes it happens as well at the top, isn't it? The number of times I've seen very senior executives saying, we need to transform, and then they continue explaining to you why we should preserve the status quo. So there's a lot of that happening as well, isn't there? And in your experience, how can firm build a speak-up culture that really support better risk identification and decision making, right? That people make actual informed decision and know what they know and also know what they don't know, because you can't always make fully informed decision. That doesn't exist in this world.
I mean, I think that comes back to experience, right? A lot of it is training people on, first and foremost, how to do that, but then giving them the opportunity to learn as well from being in that scenario, having to make decisions, and then helping them course correct along the way and making sure that there is the right, leadership and oversight and the appropriate check and challenge to those decisions that they're taking, so that everybody's making sure that they're doing they're trying to make the best decisions that they can make at that point in time. And then, I think like with all things, it is about learning, and it is about continuing to to grow and develop the skills, and as new things emerge, making sure that people are being made aware of potential new risks, potential new kind of compliance obligations that they need to make sure that they're following, and that is done in a way that is timely and clear and is explicit in terms of expectations.
And that's not easy to do, right? So how do you get leadership teams through that cultural change? And also, especially connected to like digital or regulatory transformation, right? Sometimes it could be quite far-reaching.
I think it's a number of different ways in which you can do that. I mean, first of all, it's sort of, you need leaders who want to be curious about that and who want to learn and who are investing as much in their own sort of development there. It's not just let's just tell everybody what they need to do. You're making sure that leaders are equipped for the future and that they're getting access to, it could be industry forums, it could be thought leadership. But it's making it a part of their job to be up to speed and up to date on sort of the changes that are coming through and how that might impact the organization. It's about getting them to probably also collaborate across their organization as well, to discuss ideas and to connect the dots across like the different functions and to have that active dialogue across the leadership team.
And I think it's a perfect segue, I think, to the last part of our discussion, right, on people management, and I'd love to get your views on how do you build and retain great talent in a risk and compliance space, whether actually from your perspective in consultancy or any advice you can have for industry leaders as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think to my mind, the biggest thing that we can always do for people that we work with is to be stewards and to help them grow and develop their skills and capabilities and feel that they're in an environment where they are trusted, they're being given opportunities to grow, but there's someone there to also kind of course correct and show them the way. And I think that it's also important that people feel that they're being invested in, that they have the right training and the right opportunities to develop the skills that are going to help them be successful. And again, that we're invested in that, in their growth. I think that they also need to take personal accountability for that too. And I think that that's something that needs to be encouraged, that this is something that they own their career and they need to kind of develop and grow the skills required for that, but that we're here to help them and that we give them access to the resources that they need to be able to do that, whether that's, organic or inorganic sort of learning activities. But I think, kind of encouraging teams to, to the extent that you can, give them the opportunity to try and succeed and learn from their experience is really important.
Just building on that, now looking at more senior leader, what advice do you have for leaders trying to embed risk thinking into business decision making, not only within their own team?
A good question. I think that some of it is probably, pulling up when you see those sort of what's called teachable moments, as it were, where you see that the choices you could have made and maybe replaying scenarios and sort of saying, okay, well, this is what happened this time. Maybe if we'd done it this way, perhaps this would have been the outcome. I think sort of giving people an environment that sort of it's safe to fail in is important. And then sort of helping them learn from that experience. I think, helping them sort of, I guess, ask the right questions up front and know what questions they should be asking. Should I be doing this? Does this make sense? If I do this, what do I think the consequences will be? And sort of playing that forward in their own mind so they're thinking about things and not just doing, I think is important. And I guess encouraging people to do that, not just sort of come in and see this as a check the box job, that this is something that is much more focused on weighing up the situation and having that sort of skill set to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's a full-time job, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, that critical thinking part is very important.
And so, applying that to yourself, how do you personally stay ahead in such a dynamic space, and really what fuels your love for continuous learning and growth?
I think it's intellectual curiosity. I'm always amazed what you can do with like technology and tools and when you see some of the problems and you see some of the challenges that clients have, when you see what technology can do to resolve those, that's really exciting. And you want to get sort of engaged in that, and you want to, you want people to have that opportunity to change how they're doing things for the better. So for me, obviously we do a lot of things where we talk to a lot of the vendors that are coming out with new products, so we understand what technology can do. It's about reading up on, kind of different, emerging trends and things that, could be used within, our clients to do things differently. And, we spend a lot of time in places like conferences and other areas where you're learning, and it's about being intellectually curious. I think so, waking up every day and sort of wanting to know what else is going on and what's out there.
And so, finally, what's next for you? What is exciting you the most for 2025 and beyond?
That's a really good question. My crystal ball. I mean, I think for me, I'm really looking forward to starting to work with our clients, to do more transformation and to go from perhaps where they've been for the last few years, where they've been very focused on a lot of regulatory activity, to really being able to kind of unleash the promise of what they could do with technology and generative AI, as well as help them design the risk and compliance functions of the future. And I guess we'll see where we go from there. So
we'll get our crystal ball out, as you say. The world is changing so fast anyway. Who knows where we will be in 6 months' time? Sam, it was a real pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you very much for sharing so much wisdom and insights. I'm sure that the audience is going to love and find it very useful and insightful. So thank you so much again for being here today with us.
No, Julien, thank you for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed talking with you today, and it's great to see you driving transformation in the way that you are doing in the industry.
Thank you for tuning in into this episode of RiskMasters today. I hope you found my conversation with Samantha Regan as insightful and energizing as I did. From transforming risk and compliance into strategic enablers to harnessing the power of AI and embedding a strong risk culture, Samantha shared a practical roadmap for what modern risk leadership looks like in action. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to follow, review, and share RiskMasters. Your feedback helps us bring more conversations with leaders shaping the future of risk and transformation. For show notes, resources, and guest preparation guide, please visit avtm.com. Don't forget, stay curious, stay connected, and join us next time as we continue exploring the evolving world of risk management and leadership. And remember, real risk leadership starts with culture, courage, and conversation. Until next time, I'm Julien Haye, and this has been RiskMasters.
Thank you for joining us on RiskMasters today. If you're ready to master risk and unleash your full potential, here's how you can take the next steps. First, head over to julienhaye.com to discover even more valuable insights from our RiskMasters. We've got a treasure trove of knowledge waiting for you. Second, don't miss out on future episodes. Hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcasting platform. Stay tuned for fascinating discussions on risk management. And third, if you found today's episode valuable, please share it on social media. Help others discover the world of RiskMasters and embark on their journey of risk mastery. Remember, success favors the bold. See you on the next episode of RiskMasters.